We've hit the halfway point of the college football season, and we have a lot to talk about. Big results, a lot of expectations for the second half of the season. I'm Jon Canzano. You can read my work at joncanzano.com. He's Jon Wilner. You can read him at wilnerhotline.com. How you doing, Wilner? What's new, man? What's happening?
Well, a lot of what's happening is up in your neck of the woods. That was some game on Saturday, and then 24 of 72 hours of aftermath too. We should get into
Before we get into that, can I share one thing before we get into that?
Share.
Do you remember as a kid going to the book fair, like at your school, or did you have a book fair at your school? Your kids probably still go to it. I have two younger daughters. Of the three, that two of them are still in elementary school, and they have a book fair. And the 10-year-old did something that just warmed my heart, Wilner.
Okay.
Do you remember a book that you picked out back at the book fair? Let's start there first. Do you remember anything about your book fair experiences?
I do not. No.
Okay. I became a big Muhammad Ali fan because I got one of those scholastic Muhammad Ali, the story of Ali books when I was in elementary school. And so the 10-year-old came home, and I was very curious to see what she picked out. And she picked out, some book, American Girl or whatever book that I wasn't that into. But she also had in her hand, Wilner, she had a poster that was rolled up. And I had given her some extra money to buy the book. And she said, "Dad, I had $5 left over, and I got you something."
Oh.
And so what my 10-year-old daughter got for me at the book fair is a poster of all the NFL teams in the NFC and the AFC. You can see here, in case I forget, the 49ers are in the NFC West. I now have this. I'm going to put it on the wall here in the studio.
We got a prop. We got a prop.
We got props now. But I thought it was like the most heartwarming thing. She knows I'm a sports guy.
Yeah.
She's buying me a poster. "Dad, here are all the NFL teams." And she said it was the last one. I got it. It's $5. And
that's fantastic.
Might be the best gift I ever got. Love that.
Remember those old NFL, like you could buy the sheets that had all the team logos on them? That stuff was great.
I had the lunchbox. Did you have the lunchbox with all the helmets, the NFL helmets on it? I had that lunchbox.
I actually had a lunchbox with one helmet, and you're not supposed to say the word. It was the Washington football team's nickname.
You're right.
Years ago. Just that was the one I took to school for many years.
To this day, there are two things that sort of bring me back to being like 10 or 11 years old. It's if I see one of those old lunchboxes somewhere, like at an antique store, or that handheld football game. Do you remember that one where you had the little, it was like a 3-on-3 football game, and what was that? Coleco or Mattel or something? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Take you right back.
And the vibrating football game where the players would never go where you pointed them. Oh yeah.
I pulled it out of the garage and set it up for the kids, and their amusement or interest in it lasted about 90 seconds. And I ran one play, and they were like, "I don't get it," and they walked away. So there's that. Let's get going. Let's talk about this. You mentioned it. Oregon beats Ohio State. Big game. How did it play in your neck of the woods as you took it in along with 10 million other people watching on NBC?
Yeah, I mean, it lived up to the billing, didn't it? Everybody had been looking forward to it all season, and it was at least as good as we wanted. I thought it was fantastic. Well played, back and forth. Two teams capable of winning the national championship, playing at a high level. It was spectacular. Are your ears still ringing?
Yeah, I mean, I as I drove home from the game, I didn't get home till about 2:00 in the morning because I was there late. But as I drove home, my ears were ringing all the way down I-5, and it was louder than I've ever heard Autzen Stadium. I thought the crowd really showed up. There were quite a few Ohio State fans there, but I thought it was a real, proud moment, I think, for a lot of people at that stadium that wanted the rest of the world, the rest of the college football world to know, hey, this is a great stadium. 60,000 people can be really loud. They're right on top of you. You were just there a couple of weeks ago. They're right on top of you at the stadium. And so it was really loud. The other thing was, we criticized Oregon in the early part of the season. They didn't look good against Idaho. They didn't look good against Boise State, right? They barely won those games, had to really scramble at the end of the Boise State game. And I thought that helped Oregon in this last weekend, that Oregon had been in some close games, and watch Dylan Gabriel with about 4 minutes to go just drive right down the field. I was like, they've done this. Right. Ohio State, conversely, they looked a little out of sorts. They hadn't been in a close game. I think they mismanaged a couple of things on that final drive. Certainly, Will Howard would probably like to have a second back, a little earlier. But Ohio State looked a little bit frantic at the end of the game, and I thought that played a role. But the bigger takeaway, to your point, it delivered. I wondered, would Oregon, there's a saying in theater, is the stage too big for the play? I wondered if Oregon would show up, bright lights, NBC, not having won a game like this. What would that do to Oregon? They looked mostly fine. And I think confidence builder for Dan Lanning's program.
For sure. I also thought Lanning coached a fantastic game. And I have certainly criticized him last year for his game management in the Washington games in particular, fourth being too aggressive, fourth down. Even 2 years ago, the Washington-Oregon game in Autzen in his play calling. But, boy, he coached every aspect was fantastic, I thought, from just the general play calling, right? Their game plan to attack Ohio State deep. And then certainly the rocket shot onside kick was fantastic. And then, we should get into it. The 12 men on the field loophole, which they exploited to their benefit, and good for them. That was something else. Could you sense at the game in real time that they had put the 12th guy on the field on purpose?
No. And you didn't realize it in real time. I saw it first on social media as, Oregon was celebrating, some people sort of pointing out, but I saw the 12th player walk onto the field, and I thought, oh, he's not supposed to be there. So, the other thing was, I'll nitpick Lanning a little bit here. I think he did a really good job, but in the first quarter on that first drive, he's got to call timeout when his player, Jeffrey Bossa, is saying, hey, I intercepted the pass. He was doing this, review it. Yeah. Lanning should have called timeout. I can tell you what the problem was inside the stadium. The feed from NBC was 2 plays behind the actual game action. So the assistant coaches in the coaching box, who would normally get in Lanning's ear and say, hey, call timeout, give him a chance to look at the replay. I just don't think there was enough time there. And I was saying in the press box, I was saying out loud, I was going, timeout. He didn't call the timeout. Ohio State knew what was going on. They rushed to the line of scrimmage and snapped the ball. I thought that was Ohio State goes on to score in that drive. That was potentially a 7-point swing that I think would have bit Dan Lanning had, Ohio State kicked a field goal in the end. I also think that, he came running in, he calls the timeout. They put the 12th player on the field. He later essentially confirms that was a strategy. NCAA is going to close that loophole. But I thought that was a nice little moment for him, because he had been criticized, as you point out, fairly for some of the coaching decisions last year. I didn't see this as an ethical breach by Dan Lanning. No. This is the same as, a hack-a-shack, right? Making him shoot free throws. This is the same as taking a 5-yard delay a game to give your kicker a better angle. This is a rule that the NCAA has left available to the teams at that moment. And Dan Lanning and his staff called timeout and said, hey, we're going to use this to our advantage. I mean, that's a strategy play, and he looks smart for doing it.
Very smart. And you don't often see the NCAA address a rule change in the middle of the season, certainly as quickly as they are with this. And I know you reported on the situation a bit yesterday. Do you expect we're going to get a rule change before the games kick off on Saturday?
Yeah, we're recording this on Wednesday, right? And I am told that the heads of officiating in all the conferences have a weekly meeting every Wednesday. That interpretation should come out of that meeting. So I'm expecting something probably by the time people are watching this, that there's been an update. I'll put it in the notes for the YouTube viewers. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, just reach down and hit the subscribe button. But look, I think that it was Lanning taking advantage and his staff taking advantage of a unusual circumstance. It reminds me a little bit, the reaction of the NCAA reminds me a little bit. I think it was a couple of years ago. We had a quarterback who pretended like he was going to slide or pretended like he was going out of bounds, and then he turned upfield and went for a touchdown, and everybody went, "Wait a minute!"
Oh, yeah, Kenny Pickett at Pittsburgh.
Yeah, you can't do that. You're going to get somebody killed if you start playing it that way. They made an in-season interpretation adjustment on that. So I was told, I talked to somebody with the NCAA, and they sort of said, "Look, this is going to be addressed." I kind of wonder, Wilner, do you think the NCAA is so quick to address it if it doesn't happen to Ohio State? I'm just asking. Like, I'm just wondering if this happens to Washington State, if this happens to, if it happens to Oregon, if it's Ohio State doing it to Oregon, do you think they swoop in as swiftly, or because it happens to Ohio State, does it get a lot of attention?
Well, it certainly gets a lot of attention with Ohio State being on the wrong end. I would say it would depend on the magnitude of the game. If it's a Washington State-Nevada game on the CW at 7 o'clock at night, I'm not sure it does. But if it had been Washington against Michigan or Washington against Penn State on NBC with 10 million people watching, then I think it would be. I think a lot of it is the circumstance, not necessarily the name of the team, but that certainly adds a sense of urgency to the situation if you're the NCAA, because there are certainly going to be dozens of coaches that will do the same. They'll start to take advantage of the rule just like Lanning did. I wonder if they're going to call it the Lanning rule. Like the
I had people who pointed out that it's the Buddy Ryan strategy, that he had used it, before in the NFL. And of course, Rick Neuheisel talking about how Arizona State's staff used it against him. By the way, the D coordinator on that ASU team, Trent Bray's dad, the Oregon State coach, it was his father who was the D coordinator there. So this has been around for a while. Yeah. It just hasn't been utilized, like you pointed out, on a big stage. But there were a lot of people saying this is an ethical thing. It's a slippery slope. How far away are you from Connor Stallions? It's a win at all costs thing. I'm not going that far. I'm pumping the brakes a little bit on that, because it reminds me more of like when Chip Kelly was at Oregon and they were playing so fast that he would call 3 plays. They would run out onto the field. They'd run 3 plays before the defense had a chance to get set. Nick Saban was upset about how Oregon was playing fast. Everybody was worried about it. They eventually made a rule change and said, hey, you've got to allow the defense to get set. Yeah, if you substitute, they get to substitute. They eventually did some rule changes that rectified that, but I don't think it was an ethical breach by Dan Lanning. I think it was a strategy play.
Oh, yeah. Not even that never even occurred to me that it was an ethical breach. I mean, it's not as bad as players faking injuries to slow down the other team, which certainly has been done a lot in the Pacific Northwest in various forms and fashions.
Do you think because there's a couple things there, because, he runs in and he calls timeout. As he's calling timeout, Ohio State was snapping the ball. Will Howard was going to get sacked on that play. And I kind of groaned a little bit, and I was like, oh gosh, look, Ohio State looked very disorganized, but Lanning wanted a timeout. And then he comes out of that, he goes 12 men on the field. Do you think if Oregon intercepts the pass and then gets called for 12 men on the field, that the narrative is different, or do you think people would understand?
It would be different. The outcome really shapes the narrative. It's a great question. But I also think if Jeremiah Smith doesn't push off offensive pass interference, then it doesn't matter. Everything is different, right? And you got a freshman who makes a dumb mistake at a crucial time. That's really, to me, what costs Ohio State the game. Not the 12 men or the Will Howard slide. All Smith has to do is not push off. The guy doesn't need an advantage. He's a absolute beast out there.
All right, how about this? How about you're on the 26-yard line, Ryan Day and Chip Kelly? Why are you throwing the ball in that situation? You've got a good kicker. You're on the 26-yard line. You've got one timeout. I thought Ohio State, when he dropped back to pass, I said, oh gosh, they're doing Oregon a favor here, because you have a chance for some bad things to happen that could break in Oregon's favor. And turns out a bad thing happened. Yeah. If I'm Ryan Day, I'm running the football. I'm setting up for a game-winning field goal there. And I'm not necessarily looking at, trying to score a touchdown, but that's how it went. Won't be surprised if these teams play again. creates a real narrow margin for Ohio State, right? Ohio State doesn't have a mulligan or two. They've got Penn State. They've got Michigan on the schedule. And it gives Oregon some breathing room.
Does give them some breathing room. These teams could meet 2 more times for all we know. They could meet in the Big Ten championship game and then again in the playoff. Yeah. The playoff there's nothing in the playoff about avoiding rematches. So who knows? But I do agree. Oregon's got plenty of cushion now. Ohio State can probably afford to lose 1 more, and that would be it. I don't know that a 3-loss team from the Big Ten or the SEC is going to get in to the playoff unless that 3rd loss is in the conference championship game. Then maybe you do. But certainly 3 losses in the regular season, and you're not going to make the cut.
Yeah, I went back and looked at the last decade. I think we are going to get a 3-loss team in, because I think there's a sort of a real muddled mass after maybe, I think Texas is the best team, and then maybe Oregon. And then there's, I think, this sort of muddled mass in the middle there. I think one of the at-large teams from the Big Ten or SEC could have 3 losses. And if you go back, you find a couple of cases in a few years ago where maybe a 3-loss Utah team would have got in, but it just requires the right combination. And I expect we're going to see a lot of public lobbying here running up to the first release of the polls on that Tuesday election night. But, I thought it was a nice moment too for, the Pacific time zone, who, hasn't regularly come up with wins like that on a big stage. We just saw Washington lose to Michigan, in the national championship game. And so Oregon beating Ohio State, I think, took a little bit of the shine off of, the other time zones. Yeah. Shall we move into some of the mid-season awards?
What do we got? Okay, yeah, let's go.
Let's talk about it. All right, let's hand out some official sounding mid-season awards.
Okay.
I'm going to start. I'm going to do the Nobody's Having More Fun Than award. Okay. How about Kenny Dillingham, Arizona State coach?
Yeah.
Nobody having more fun than Kenny Dillingham. Like, did you see him on the post-game broadcast? He wins another game. It's Dillingham, on the field. He's got the students around him. He sort of melts into the crowd and says, I used to be one of these guys, and he just disappears. I don't know if we've seen him since. They may have carried him off like he's one of the goalposts, but Kenny Dillingham in Arizona State, nobody having more fun than Kenny.
Nobody. That was I have never seen a post-game interview with a coach like that. He just disappeared. It was fantastic. They're having a heck of a season. There's no doubt. I'm going to go with the best player nobody expected, right? If you had started the season with a list of 25, maybe even 50 contenders for a Heisman Trophy, Ashton Jeanty would not have been on there. Right? And now he's Boise State tailback. He is the betting favorite after 6 games, on pace to break one of the most hallowed records in the entire sport. Barry Sanders' single-season rushing record, I think it's 26-28, 26-56, something like that. Jeanty's averaging over 200 yards a carry. It has not all come against second-tier competition, because he had 190 against Oregon. He outrushed Ohio State's entire team against Oregon. He is absolutely phenomenal, and it would be fantastic, even if he doesn't win, just to get a Boise State player, a Group of 5 player, to New York for the Heisman ceremony. I think would be great for the sport.
I think he can win it, Wilner. I think he's that kind of player, and he's that special. And I am eager to see where he ends up in the eyes of the NFL, but I think he can win that thing. I've got him at the top of my Heisman board right now. If I had to cast my ballot today, I would go Jeanty 1, and 7.7 yards a carry against Oregon, went for $192. Yeah. They took him out of the game against Portland State because it was over at halftime. He could have had 300 or 400 yards in that game. Wow. It was ridiculous. Bruce Barnum, the Portland State coach, said, everyone knows he's getting the ball. You have the right defense called. You actually end up with an unblocked player one-on-one with him, and you have no shot. And it's a touchdown on the other end. So I think it's going to be really fun to see what he does going down the stretch. I think, Oregon State plays them in the season finale. Oregon State's having some real problems on the defensive line, stopping run games. Nevada went for 352 against them. UNLV is probably going to get a 300-yard rushing game against the Beavers this week, unless they fix something. But Genty against Oregon State in the season finale, when the Heisman's on the line, could be real favorable for Boise State. I think he could win that thing. But I'll dovetail off of that with my can't take my eyes off the guy. How about Travis Hunter at Colorado? I think anything he does, offense, defense, anything on TikTok or Instagram, I'm here for it. He has been a joy to watch as a college football player. And, I've interviewed him one-on-one a couple times. Just a great kid who will talk to you about fishing and whatever else. Real happy that he's having a nice season.
Well, and we'll see. I think he's supposed to play this week, right?
Yeah.
He went out with a shoulder injury. It sounds like he's going to play. I don't know if he can keep up 120 snaps. That's a lot of punishment, but he plays at an All-American level at 2 different positions. We never see anything like that. Well, I've got one more. I'm going to go with the College Football World is Flat Award.
Okay.
Not only did we see Vanderbilt beat Alabama, first time in 50, 60 years at least. Vanderbilt had been 0-60 against top 5 teams, and they beat Alabama. But this week, Army and Navy are both ranked. It is the first time they have been ranked in the same week since 1960. They are undefeated at this point in the season. It's deeper in the season this year than they have been in any year since 1945, when they were basically undefeated against the globe. But I think it's fantastic. We're seeing all sorts of indicators that NIL has not completely screwed up college football. In fact, it may be leveling the playing field a little bit between NIL and the transfer portal, right? I think it'd be great if either Army or Navy can run the table and give the committee, so the selection committee for the playoff, a real debate as to what to do. Boise State, Army, Navy. I think it'd be fantastic for the sport if one of the service academies could keep going.
We'll keep an eye on that. All right, I've got one more. How about this? How about cringiest thing that we've seen in the first half of the college football season? Did you see the video of the Penn State fan who paid $1,500 or $1,800 so he could run on the field at USC? Yeah. USC's doing this to raise some revenue. Tacky. USC is allowing some fans to pay between $1,400 and $1,800 to have a chance to run onto the field. And I can hear a bunch of programs and athletic directors out there going, hey, wait a minute. Can we make this an NIL thing? Is that legal? Can we charge how much we're all our fans pay to run onto the field? But it was just the cringiest thing ever to see a Penn State fan running onto the field at the Coliseum and alongside a bunch of other elite fans who are running onto the field because their dad or somebody could pay $1,500 to let them take a 100-yard jog onto the football field.
What's crazy to me that USC didn't have any safeguards to prevent that from happening. Somebody in a Penn State jersey running out on the Coliseum field. That's crazy. I think they have changed that rule as quickly as the NCAA is changing the 12 men on the field rule, because we will not see that happen again. I would imagine SC will put in some kind of framework to prevent fans of opposing teams from doing that.
I started doing the math and I was like, okay, Oregon at Autzen Stadium. Could Oregon get 100 fans to pay $1,500 bucks? And then, not that Oregon needs the money for their NIL collective, but I just started thinking, is this, they're looking for revenue everywhere, Wilner, but I think it's tacky. It's USC. Should not be doing this. Should not be selling the ability for fans to run.
Well, it's also part of the what else can go wrong for USC this season, right? I mean, they're 1-3 in Big Ten play, not what they expected when they joined the conference, I wouldn't think, and especially with the home law, they've blown losses in the second half in all 3 of their games.
Let's great pivot.
Oh, there we go.
Let's check on the X's.
Okay.
Pac-12's X's. USC, one of them. UCLA. Let's start with them because they were the first 2 to leave the conference in the summer of 2022. They announced they're leaving. Lincoln Riley's got too much time left on his contract, I think, for Jen Cohen to make a move on him. But it's not lost on me that she's not the AD that hired him. And, that the connection, and coaches will always tell you, the most uncomfortable thing for them is when they look around and they don't see anybody in the room who hired them or was there when they got hired. Lincoln Riley's got to do better. He's got to sound better. He's got to put on the big boy pants and stop acting like a child in the news conferences. And they've got to perform better on the field. And if they don't, he's in some trouble. But I think it's a little too early, given that it was a 10-year, $110 million deal, I think, that he signed out of the gates. There's an awful lot of money left on that contract. But if I'm him and he really doesn't think that he can accelerate or elevate the program from where it's at, I might be thinking about the NFL instead of what might be an unceremonious exit here in a year or two.
Yeah, they certainly have underperformed, haven't they? It's October 15th or whatever, and they're out of the playoff.
Yeah.
3 losses, they're done. They're not the only ones who are done of the Pac-12 X's, but certainly we did not – I don't think when they beat LSU, anybody would have expected they'd take 3 losses basically in the first half of the season. And UCLA is a mess, 1-5, 0-3 in the Big Ten. They got to go to East for another 9 a.m. game this week. They do not look prepared or equipped for their new existence in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion. And
what do you make of Martin Jarmon, the athletic director, giving a public vote of confidence in the LA Times?
He's got to do it. He's got to do it. I mean, he's got a lot riding on the Deshaun Foster hire. And look, it's halfway through the guy's first season, and you knew there were going to be growing pains, right? First-time head coach. And UCLA, it's not like UCLA has been dominating for the last 30 years. So got to give it time. But certainly if they are floundering by the end of next season, then UCLA is really going to have to take a hard look at this situation. They don't look like they're equipped for the Big Ten at all.
Yeah. Well, it started on media day. I mean, Deshaun Foster got onto the stage and didn't sound prepared. And then the football team didn't look prepared, and they are a terrible offensive team. In his defense, Chip Kelly leaves late, certainly you can make that argument, but I think that UCLA's athletic department was setting up the narrative, weeks ago, right? I talked to somebody in the athletic department who said, hey, we haven't had sustained success in the last 2 decades. Look at UCLA football in the last 2 decades. This isn't anything new. But that's to me, that's an excuse. Like, you're in a world now in the Big Ten where you've got to invest and you've got to be smart because you are up against other programs that have deep pockets, resources, and are hiring good coaches. So, the UCLA is light years behind, the middle of the Big Ten conference, and
they are.
You need to make a recalibration quickly, or they're going to become a doormat.
Yep. And they're, Washington struggling also. You kind of expected that. New coach, basically entirely new starting lineup, overhauled roster, so much transition there. But they just got beat badly at Iowa. They've got 3 losses, one of them to Washington State in Seattle. And there's still tons of tough games left for the Huskies. I'm not sure Washington's going to even make the postseason. And then you look at, the teams that went to the ACC, a lot of hype around Cal and the Calgorithm and all that, but Cal's 0-3 in the ACC. Stanford just has gotten blitzed by Notre Dame and Virginia Tech. Big 12 schools. Utah is over 500, but not what we thought. Arizona is struggling. Colorado's decent. ASU and Oregon are the 2 out of the 10 that could really say, hey, we love it. We love our new existence.
Yeah, it looks like a good move. I'll put Colorado in the it looks like a good move category too, because the competition's not as good as what they were facing in the Pac-12, and I think they're going to have more success over the course of this season. But I agree with you on Washington. I think Jed Fish is smart. He says some of the right things in the post game, but that team, it's a coach in transition, and anytime you have a new coaching staff, you're going to have issues. So I think, I think Washington, the best case scenario for Washington is 6-6. I think they potentially are a 5-7 team. But I'm not too worried about that. Utah's got quarterback problems. Cam Rising, feels so bad for the guy. He just looked so bad last week and couldn't complete a pass, can't grip the ball, can't move. It looked like, I went out with my 8 and 10-year-old to the local baseball diamond, and I ran the bases, Wilner. He looked like me. I was out there trying to run the bases as fast as I can after multiple knee surgeries. I feel so bad for Cam Rising, but I also am looking at Utah going, gosh, how do you end up in a situation where so much of your team is built around a guy that was unreliable a year ago and you couldn't really count on a year ago? And so here they are trying to spin out of it. They've got a good coaching staff and some good players, but we'll see what happens to Utah. But Stanford, injury problems. Cal Super Bowl may have been that game day appearance in the game against Miami. I think as far as the X's are concerned, I think it's mostly unfavorable, but Oregon certainly living large and ASU looking good.
Yep. And the bottom line too is these schools didn't leave the Pac-12 based on how they were going to perform on the field this year or next year, right? They left the Pac-12 because they wanted more money and they wanted a better media deal. And they're going to have to live with the consequences, whether that's losses, 9 a.m. games on the East Coast, whatever it is. I mean, Deion Sanders is complaining that Colorado keeps getting the 8:15 Mountain Time kickoffs. They got another one coming up. He's like, I thought this was going to end when we left the Pac-12, and I don't understand why he thought that, because they didn't change time zones, just conferences. But all this stuff is all, in a way, secondary to why these schools left. And I'm guessing if you gave them sodium pentothal, all the leadership at all those schools would say, one, we wanted the Pac-12 to work out, but two, this was our best option given the scenario, and we're happy with where we are, because on the field losses are secondary.
I keep going back to something Bob Thompson, our other host on this podcast.
Yes, he is.
long ago. Like, look, I asked him when USC and UCLA were still part of the conference, what he projected the media rights value for the conference to be. He said 500 million split 12 ways. I think it came out to 41.9 million or 41.6 million, something like that.
Yeah.
That would have been the distribution, 41.6. Keep that number in mind. Then when they became a conference of 10, he said 300 million for 10. So now you're at 30 million per school, and I look around, Wilner, at what everyone ended up with and the distribution everyone ended up with. You look, Stanford and Cal didn't get 30 million, and you're looking over at Utah and ASU and Arizona. They broke about even, maybe a little ahead. Oregon and Washington aren't getting full distributions for 5-6 years. They're getting 30, 31, 32 million as it ramps up. They didn't come out of that. The schools didn't come out of that much better than they would have been had they just stayed in the Pac-12 or taken the Apple deal. But I think it was a longer term play for Oregon and Washington. That's how they'll spin it. I thought about it too, as Oregon beat Ohio State last Saturday. I thought, gosh, if Oregon was in the Pac-12 and won that same game, does it have the same national impact? Does it have Oregon as the number 2 team in the country? Is there even does the Pac-12, stigma of the Pac-12 anchor or weigh down Oregon if that is a victory in the Pac-12? I don't know.
Well, Oregon did win that game. They went to Columbus and won. Right. Was it 2021? Huge TV audience. Go beat the Buckeyes at Ohio Stadium. So everybody acted like, oh, this has never happened before, but it has. It has.
That's right.
It's just that we don't see the Michigans and Ohio States coming west very often, right? Now that will happen much more frequently. Michigan was in Seattle a couple weeks ago, so in that regard, it's different. But there have been plenty of chances for the old Pac-12 schools to win games like that in the past. What else we got?
We got some fearless predictions.
Okay.
Let's do this. Fearless predictions. All right. I'm going to go that the Big Ten Conference Championship game comes down to a tiebreaker. How about that? The conference tiebreaker, I took a look at it this week because you've got 3 undefeated teams in Oregon and Penn State and Indiana who potentially could all end up undefeated. And I started to look at the tiebreaks, Wilner. I think we're going to get a tiebreak situation in the Big Ten Conference. And, the tiebreaker for 3 teams that don't play each other, who gets into the conference championship game, comes down to your combined opponent's win percentage. So you want to root for Washington and UCLA if you're Oregon, and you want, other schools maybe not so much, but Penn State still has to play Ohio State. Indiana, I'm looking at them. They look fantastic. Fearless prediction, it comes down to a tiebreaker scenario.
Yeah, and you're going to have a advanced degree in mathematics to figure that out. They spent the Big Ten spent many months trying to avoid having their tiebreaker create too much controversy. We will see how that looks. I am going to my first prediction is Washington State is going to finish 11-1. I think the Cougars are going to win out. They are going to be favored in every game. I think they are going to do what they need to do, finish 11-1, miss the playoff, but be part of the conversation in late November as to whether they should get in ahead of a multi-loss team from the Big 12 or the ACC. And part of what Washington State needs to happen is they need the Huskies to finish well. That will help prop up their resume. But I think this is an 11-1 season for Washington State with no playoff berth.
This just in. The NCAA football play interpretation bulletin has been released.
Okay.
Covering the end of half and end of game substitutions. They have made a correction to the situation at the end of the Oregon game and issued a statement. So the interpretation, the document itself, I got to open it up. Here we go. So the interpretation is that the team that is being negatively affected by the game clock can opt to have the time put back on the clock. They can also opt to decline the penalty.
Gotcha.
So it sort of closes the loophole.
Breaking news. They could have added some time to the clock. I would have been in favor of taking a hard line stance, add time under 2 minutes if the defense has got 12 guys on the field.
Fearless prediction. We won't see 12 men on the field.
There you go.
As a strategy moving forward, because the NCAA has officially closed that loophole in the rule book, and they should have. Here's another fearless prediction. Okay. Dylan Gabriel is going to the Downtown Athletic Club. He'll be a finalist. Right. I don't think he can win the award, but I think he's going to be in the room maybe when Ashton Genty or Travis Hunter picks up the award. Right now, my vote would be with Ashton Genty, but Dylan Gabriel played his way onto ballots against Ohio State. I think he can stay there. He looked good. Oregon's offense looks good. They're going to have a lot of the stage. All of the ingredients for a Heisman finalist are there for Dylan Gabriel.
Good one. I'm going to the postseason for my next prediction. It's going to be the same old story. There's a lot of parity, right? And there's 8 more teams in the playoff. But I still think how many teams are capable of winning a game the last 2 rounds? In the semifinals and finals, it is the same schools that we are accustomed to seeing, right? It's Ohio State and it's Georgia and it's Alabama, maybe Oregon and Texas. But the parity that we're seeing and the chaos with the upsets, we had that huge weekend of upsets that just passed. It's going to be the same old story once we get past the quarterfinals. There are only a handful of teams capable of winning the national title. They're the ones that have recruited all the blue chip players on the offensive and defensive lines. They're the ones that play in the Big Ten and the SEC. So as great as the playoff is going to be, and I think it's changing the sport more than anything that's ever happened in college football, it's going to be the same old story when we get to the last couple rounds. It's still going to be the heavyweight programs.
I think
it's not like March Madness. Yeah. It's not going to be like March Madness where you get, a Butler, a George Mason in the Final Four. That is not happening.
I'm interested more in the early rounds from that standpoint, because I think there's a real possibility that Boise State, if they win out, could end up as the 4 seed and get a bye early. And I think that creates a really interesting first round, second round matchup situation where you get maybe the Big 12 champion is the 5 seed and Boise State is the 4 seed, or is the the 4th highest ranked conference champion, so they get the 4 seed. I'm interested to see what happens there and whether or not can Boise win a game in the playoff, and does that change sort of the thinking of the Big Ten and the SEC as they're trying to run away with it all? I think that's to me, I'm interested in that early round, and I'm interested in where does Boise end up, because if you're Boise State, you watched Oregon lose. If you're Boise State, you watched Oregon beat Ohio State, and you went, that helps our narrative. Yeah. That helps our cause, as Boise played Oregon just as tough as Ohio State did, if you really look at it.
Absolutely. And if you're Boise, you want Texas Tech to win the Big 12, because you pummeled Washington State and Washington State pummeled Texas Tech. And so that if it's a situation where Boise is sitting there 12-1, they're the Mountain West champs, their only loss is by 3 points at Oregon, and the Big 12 champ is Texas Tech, that's lost, say, 2 games in conference and plus the game to Washington State, I think you can make a great case Boise should be seated ahead of Texas Tech, which would make Boise one of the top 4 with the opening round bye, force Texas Tech to have to play in the first round. That would be certainly a twist that nobody would have expected when they created the current format that is so tilted toward the Power 4 conferences.
And it would give Boise a potential, quarterfinal game that it could win, and it doesn't create, you're playing as the 11 seed or the 12 seed and you're getting, the second place team in the SEC. It throws a little bit of a wrinkle into the playoffs. Yeah. Speaking of the SEC and the Big Ten, let's pivot here. What are they up to? What are they up to with this scheduling partnership?
They are working on its early stages, but they're working on setting up an in-season scheduling challenge, so to speak. And I don't know exactly how it would work, but you cross-match teams, and it may be on a dedicated week every year, a couple of weeks every year. But basically, they are looking for more high-level games, because then they can go to their media partners. For the Big Ten, that's Fox. For the SEC, that's ESPN. They can say, look, that game you saw, Texas, Michigan, that drew however many, 7-8 million viewers, we're going to have those games all the time, every year, and give us more money. And that's basically what it comes down. Give us more money. We're gonna provide you with a better product for your audience. You give us more money. And the negative impact is certainly that could create fewer windows in the schedules for those teams to play ACC, Big 12 opponents, Group of 5 opponents, right? That is where the downstream repercussions could come, because if the SEC is playing and the Big 10 are playing 9 conference games, which I think is going to happen in the SEC, one of them is against each other, and one of them is going to be against a FCS opponent, then that's one. That leaves one for each school, maybe against a Group of 5 or the ACC or Big 12. So it's another poor outcome for everybody in college football that is not the SEC or Big 10.
Yeah, and this is not like the Alliance. This is the Power 2 huddling up and getting together. I like it from a television standpoint.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me from a revenue standpoint. I've always wondered why, they didn't allow more flexibility in the schedule to set up really good matchups. But again, I'm also a proponent of the health of the overall ecosystem.
Yep.
And this doesn't help the overall ecosystem. It creates further imbalance.
The other thing it does is it kind of gives a stiff arm to private equity, because that it is certainly saying, you know what, we don't need your money, because we're going to find ways to generate more money on our own. And that certainly I'm sure is in the back of the minds of the 2 commissioners and a lot of the athletic directors and presidents.
Pivoting to the most interesting games of the weekend. Obviously there's a big football game with Alabama and Tennessee. Kalen DeBoer, the Alabama fans starting to get a little restless with the start of the DeBoer tenure. that's a game certainly people have their eyes on. I'm even looking to the Friday night game as Oregon goes to Purdue. Look, Purdue's been a little better on the offensive side of the ball. You know, they came up with 49 points last week. They're nowhere near as good as Oregon, but you have pointed out numerous times traveling across multiple time zones tends to do things to teams. Is there a letdown in there for Oregon somewhere? Does Purdue play like it's a Super Bowl? I'm interested in that game. I'm interested in what's going to happen to DeBoer. I'm interested in how Oregon performs coming out of the Ohio State win and all that emotion.
Yep. Triple whammy, post Ohio State emotion, cross-country flight, and a Friday game, short week of preparation. So that'll be, I totally agree with you. I am certainly interested in the Georgia-Texas game in Austin. ESPN Game Day will be there. The type of game we probably would not have seen without realignment, but now this is a conference matchup. And to me, it is interesting because Georgia, I don't know if it's a must win, but it's close because they've already got a loss. So to Alabama. And if they have 2 losses in the middle of October, I'm not sure they get into the playoff if they have 3. So there's a little bit of pressure on Georgia, whereas Texas, they're undefeated. They can afford to take a loss. So I'm very curious to see how that thing plays out. 2 teams, obviously, that have the talent to win the national championship.
I'm also rubbernecking a little bit on the Utah game as Utah's got TCU. And look, this is life after Cam Rising for Utah. And, you know, how do they adjust? How focused do they look? What is Andy Ludwig, the offensive coordinator? What's that offense look like? You know, is this Utah able now to kind of, you know, stop waiting on Cam and really get about, you know, trying to get their season back on track? Yep. So I'm curious to see how they look because, you know, the Holy War is coming up November 9th and BYU looks really good. Yes, and so if Utah doesn't figure it out, that is a big stakes game in Salt Lake City.
It is indeed. I'm going to go. I got one more. Arizona State at Cincinnati, 9 a.m. game on Saturday for the Sun Devils, 9 a.m. Pacific in Cincinnati. So pretty long trip, early game. ASU, much like Oregon, coming off a very emotional performance. Now, they do have an extra day to get ready because the ASU-Utah game was on Friday. But as you pointed out, we still have not seen Kenny Dillingham since he disappeared into the mosh pit. We don't know for sure that he is going to be coaching. So we'll see. Now, I'm joking about that, but that is indicative of what that game was like for them. They had lost to Utah 55-3 last year. They flipped the scoreboard by 60 points. Huge win for them, for their program. Where's their emotional level? Going to Cincinnati, that's not exactly a game where you're going to get super excited about. It's Cincinnati. So I'm curious to see how the Sun Devils do there. If they win, they clinch a bowl bid, which would be an incredible accomplishment for them.
I mean, they've got an injury at quarterback with Sam Levitt, and so I think it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one, but they have answered every call this season.
Pretty much.
They have just been fantastic. They've been good in close games. They really compete. I think they're ahead of schedule with winning games, but they may be benefiting too by a move to the Big 12 where they're not running into USC and Oregon and Washington this season. You know, they're running into, you know, Texas Tech and Kansas State and good for Kenny Dillingham. But, you know, here's the game I'm looking at too. And it's one in the state of Oregon, but Oregon State's got to figure something out on the defensive side of the ball or the rest of their season is going to be dismal. Trent Bray talking about, you know, he's got 7 defensive linemen who are out with injuries. They're decimated at that position. They were unable to stop Nevada's run game. And here comes UNLV, who happens to run the ball pretty well. But UNLV doesn't play defense. So I expect kind of a high-scoring game if Oregon State can figure some things out on offense. But, you know, they played a tight end at defensive end last week. You know, they didn't they're so beat up. And this is another one. You saw Nevada's coach throw some shade, called it the Pack Who at the in his post-game news conference. Took some shots at Oregon State, Washington State, probably because Nevada wasn't picked and taken with those other Mountain West schools. Is there a little chip on the shoulder for UNLV this week? I'll keep an eye on that one.
Could be. I agree. Real important game for the Beavers because they need 2 wins to get in the bowl. And if you look at their schedule, they got Boise, they got Washington State, UNLV, San Jose State's pretty good. It's going to be tight for them to get into the postseason, kind of like it is going to be for Washington. So
they've got a game at Air Force that I'm looking at the Air Force and the San Jose State games for the Beavers, and I'm going, those are like must wins.
Must wins.
And if you can get this UNLV game at home, it gives you a little bit of cushion, but it's going to be tight for them coming down the stretch. And we all know we've talked about it. Their mission this year is to what? Stay relevant, stay visible. They've been okay in that department so far. So it's no time to fade away.
You got it. We have covered a lot of ground here, man. Yeah. No guests to this week, but a lot of ground. I appreciate the conversation as always, my friend. Hit the subscribe button. Do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button. He is John Canzano at johncanzano.com, and I am Jon Wilner, the Wilner Hotline. Thanks so much. We will be back next week. We got a bunch of guests coming down the road. We got the college football playoff rankings start early November. It is going to be a great stretch run. Please join us every week. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.